let's take a look at the next cycle, which is about connecting people. What do I mean by this? I essentially mean the notion of people being able to connect to each other and connect to information anywhere. You know, everybody says anywhere, anytime, but true mobility. Now, why do I say true mobility and not just mobility? Because right now, people talk about connectivity, mobility, or being able to keep seamless connectivity as you move around, but not seamless services. So you can go any place you want and get a dial tone, but a dial tone may not be enough. And if you're somewhere else and you can't connect back to your ISP, can you read your mail? Or in some cases, you can read it, but guess what? You can't send it. That kind of stuff and having to figure out and navigate through that is just nuts. And so this next phase really needs to be driven by true mobility from a services and a connectivity perspective, as well as ubiquitous, always-on, high bandwidth connectivity. We here in the Valley almost think it's ubiquitous, but if you look throughout the world, it's not. And then home networking and just the growth of not just computers in the home, but every device in the home. Now, the enablers of this, it's interesting, are not so much technological or the obstacles, but economic and behavioral. Because a lot of the technology we need to do this actually is there. But a lot of the economic and behavioral conditions are not, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, the reason this curve is lower is not because I was trying to make it look pretty with a lower curve and a higher curve, but I actually think that from an IT demand perspective, or IT dollars, this is not going to be as much growth, because the systems architecture and the networking architecture is the same pretty much. It'll drive some increased demand, but the real win here is in the consumer devices and the services that are provided to consumers, and not so much in the IT infrastructure. So what are some of the issues here? The big ones are business models, and when I talk about business models, there's a number of different issues. One has to do with what we call either a walled garden versus a seamless connectivity or seamless services. The way you can make money in this, the reason the cellular service providers have been able to make more money, the way companies like AOL grew up is through a walled garden. You basically have people call into your services and you charge them for those services. The internet is the opposite of that, which is once you connect into the internet, you're connecting into everybody on the internet. That is a harder business model to make money on, but unless we move to the internet model and break out of the walled garden, we won't see ubiquity. You just can't do it with these walled garden approaches. And so figuring out how to make money there is a key issue. Affordable broadband to the home. $50 a month is not affordable to a lot of people. And $50 isn't enough to make money, for the vendors to make money. So this is another trigger point where people are going to have to figure out how to make the money to deploy the technology. We made a huge mistake during the bubble. Most new technologies start off high-priced while you build up the infrastructure. So you sell to businesses first. They pay a premium. Think about cell phones. Think about pagers. They pay a premium while you're building out your infrastructure, and then you drop the price to drive ubiquity. Because in the bubble, the big deal was, people used to say URL. Ubiquity now, revenue later. So people didn't worry about pricing. We dropped the price before we could build out the infrastructure, and I say we as an industry. So now, who's going to build out the industry? Government dollars is not the way to do it. We have to figure out a business model with services and value that will pay for that build out. And then the entertainment business needs to change their business model to adapt to this new world. On the other hand, the technology industry has to figure out how to protect that content as the entertainment industry is changing their business model. So there is a role for technology to play. We have to make this stuff easier to use. If we're really going to drive ubiquity and get into the home, the technology industry tends to still think about things that are too complicated. And as I mentioned before, the next cycle will drive more demand, but not as much as we saw in the last cycle. The last thing I just want to say as entrepreneurs, the consumer market is really hard for startups. So this is not an easy place for a startup to innovate. And one of the problems I think we'll have in the industry is the big companies aren't as good as innovating. And given the risk-averse environment, people are not going to want to take a risk on something that's that hard. And that's going to push off innovation, and I think it's going to push off this cycle some.